Hey everyone, I'm Norn Queen Alexis and welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about the Astra Militarum in this multi-part video series going over all things Imperial Guard. We're going to be talking about their weapons, their war gear, their tanks, their equipment, and what makes a guardsman a guardsman. This is going to be a multi-part series, and today we're starting with the light vehicles. Why? Because I really like light vehicles, and that's what inspired this video. So let's sit back, relax, and get ready for lore. So, starting us off, we have the humble bike, the motorcycle, the dirt cycle, the Volpa. There are multiple names for different varieties of motorcycle, all used by the Astra Militarum, Imperial citizens, even, and the Gene Stealer cult. But because it's used by the Astra Militarum, we're going to talk about it. The Astra Militarum make heavy use of bikes as rough riders if they don't have access to horses, reptiles, birds. There's a lot on Rough Riders, and I can do a whole video on just the Rough Riders themselves, especially the Catachans that ride giant reptiles, which I think should be a salamander thing, but that's just me. The dirt cycle is a motorcycle that is very robust. This thing is designed to last for centuries and is super cheap for the Department Menatorum to make. They can make thousands of these things and they will last thousands of years. Dirt cycles are built to last. Like, if these things don't get exploded, you can probably just pick up a part of another broken down bike, put it on yours, and just drive away. These things are designed to be fixed very easily, designed to be have extreme use, and if it gets destroyed, oh no, it's not really a big deal. The bike itself is just a one-person transport, but I see that you could probably fit two on it if you're desperate. But it is a one-person transport, and it makes use of a variety of weapons, which we will get into. But first, what is this bike actually used for? The bikes themselves are typically used for transport of equipment and scouting and reconnaissance. It also is used by the Gene Stealer cult, and I assume the Cadians as well, as a way of exploiting enemy weaknesses, setting up booby traps, and blowing people up. Typically, they're very lightly armed, and the rider will carry just their standard issue lasgun. But if they are put into a squad together, one of those members might have a specialist weapon like a grenade launcher, a plasma gun, a flamethrower, a melt-a-gun, a probably a volley gun, or various other equipments that might make a special weapon user more keen in this unit. These sergeants are typically armed with a close combat weapon of some depiction, whether that be just any of the different power weapons or a power fist. They are typically armed with a pistol alongside the close combat weapon, as they can't really wield the rifle. Some regiments, and this is very rare, will make use of the hunting lance alongside this thing, as well as a variety of hunting lances which are armed with different types of tips that the Rough Riders will use in battle, holding them alongside them and literally using them like lances on horses. You'll see this with the Adelan Rough Riders. You'll see this with the Deathcore Krieg, who use a different type of lance, but very similar. So you might be asking yourself, what the hell is the hunting lance? And that is a very good question. It is a pole with a thingy on the front of it that typically stabs into the enemy and then unleashes what's inside it. It's kind of like you're holding a bolt round and you just poke it into people and it blows them up. But there are several different varieties of hunting lance tips, and the tip and the hunting lance itself is typically a one-use item. The lance itself leaves the tip in the enemy as it rides past, and you'll see on the Rough Riders themselves that they'll have multiple tips, typically 6, 3 on each side of the horse, and then there will be somebody carrying multiple tips to resupply the unit, as well as having runners going back and forth to where they're getting their supplies from, back to the Rough Riders themselves. So I assume the bikes in this instance use them in very much a similar manner. So what the hell are the tips? What can they be? Well, you have the Inferno tip, which is basically a melta tip and is just going to eat away at the enemy just using a flash bang and super high temperatures. You have the crack tip. I know that sounds hilarious, but this is basically you stab a crack grenade into somebody and they blow up. I absolutely love that. These can be both of these can be used against actually the third one as well, the melta tip. The melta tip is a crazy weapon. If you know melta technology in Warhammer 40K, it turns vehicles into slag. It is so hot. It isn't a plasma based weapon. I'm not sure what melta technically is. The description of it changes every now and then, but it is a superheated piece of material that melts everything around it and is typically used in beams or in a flash to kill a whole bunch of guardsmen all at once or enemies all at once. But when it's put into a bomb or stuck onto a tip, that tip is going to be rammed into a tank, and they'll be aiming for weak points of the tank, the back of the tank, the top of the tank, or the treads themselves. They'll aim this tip at, stab it into, run away from it, and that whole tank, the tank side will just turn to slag. It'll immobilize, destroy, or kill everyone inside with how hot it is. So those three are typically used against mostly light tanks to heavy tanks with a melta tip to heavy infantry. Then you have the plasma tip, which is a ball of plasma that once it's hit inside, it will stay and then burst out a plasma ball, which will kill multiple enemies all at once in, again, superheated fire or plasma. It really depends what the plasma actually is, because plasma, as a material, plasma can do a lot of different things. But in 40K, plasma is typically a ball of energy that just bursts and burns everything near it. Then we have the poison tip, just in case you are fighting against certain types of Xenos. This can rarely have a type of poison that is really effective against Tyranids, though this is very, 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 very unlikely. But typically, this is useful against orcs. They'll use the antifungal rounds as a poison tip into the orc, which attacks the orc's biology and melts them into slag. They really like melting and burning things. The next one is the shock tip, which is used to cripple enemies. And this will either send a jolt through their entire body, which will kill them, or it'll incapacitate them long enough for the horses, or the bikes in this case, to just run them down. And if that doesn't work, they'll just shoot them while they're down. So those are the various different types of tips that are used by the Rough Riders. And this is also used by these bikes when they have to fill the role of a Rough Rider. But the bikes have several different roles. Again, scouting is the most common, where they'll just try to find supply lines, they'll try to find important people, and they'll try to make use of certain tactics to kill that individual that they need to kill, or to identify key locations and then get back to where the artillery crews are, so the artillery can more pinpoint the barrages into the enemy. They will also be used to cut off enemy supply lines. So the bikes themselves are very useful, but Rough Riders fill the same roles, and both are incredibly useful by any of the Astra Militarum regiments. So it really depends on preference, though I think they should move more towards the motorcycles, as they make more sense. They're easier to produce, they can build them on the go, they can repair them really quickly, where if a horse gets shot, they die, and that is, I guess they could eat it. So it's like bringing food with you. Okay, it really depends what they need the actual horse for. And yes, once their mount dies, they will consume it. The guard will consume everything. Like, they'll even eat orcs. If they get desperate enough. It's mostly because of food supplies. So moving on, we have the War Quad, or the Wolf Quad, or the various other four-wheel drive quad slash four-wheelers. I don't really know how to describe this thing. It is what it is. You can see it. We have these today, and they serve a very weird function in 40K, where the Astra Militarum makes use of them, but again, it's rare, and they will typically use them alongside Rough Riders. But what the hell is this thing used for, and why is it in 40K? Well, you're right. It is silly, and that's why it's in 40K. So the War Quad is an extremely easy to produce piece of equipment that the Astra Militarum can use, though it is rare. I don't think these things have ever had models on the tabletop, but they are referenced in lore all the time, and typically these will be used by Imperial citizens, Gene Stealer cultists, cults, and whatever else can make use of a quad. I mean, hell, orcs will steal these things and use them. But what makes this quad so good is, well, the Wolf Quad, not the War Quad, which are two different styles of quads. I don't know if the War Quad shares the same qualities as the Wolf Quad, but the Wolf Quad can use multiple different types of fuels for its engine, which is super useful, and it can mount a heavy weapon on it. The War Quad itself can transport multiple people, where the Wolf Quad typically only transports one and has a heavy weapon on it. The War Quad will again run supplies, reconnaissance, scout, and do everything that the Rough Riders can do, though it can carry a bit more equipment. So I view this thing as a more resupplyment unit for the Rough Riders than an actual war unit used by them. So, like I was saying with the bikes, this thing will probably be running lance tips back and forth to them versus where it's actually probably not doing that. There's not enough lore about this thing to properly explain what it can do. So, what I'm saying is hypothetical. My hypothetical for this thing and how I would make it useful in 40K is that it would be running lance tips and equipment and food all the way back and forth from their main headquarters or where they're located, where their commandery is located, to the scouting and hunting regiments, such as the Rough Riders, or if they're running back and forth equipment to the bikes themselves, it might run parts, it might run food for the animals, and that's my hypothetical of this. But the Wolf Quad, which is not used by the Guard as much, but the War Quad and the Wolf Quad are built in very much the same aesthetic. The War Quad can actually mount up a heavier weapon and fill the role of a lighter armored sentinel. So it will have a mounted weapon, it will get to a location that's far away, and it will just pick off things, or it'll run side with a heavy flamethrower alongside the other Rough Riders, carrying a heavier weapon into the actual battle. But this will make them much easier to see as this thing is wider and not as quick as the bikes themselves. So the bikes typically do have to slow down just a little bit for the quad to keep up. But the quad can keep up on all terrains, which makes it super useful. And I assume, like today, it has other uses where it can slightly go through rivers and things of that nature. And it is built to last, just like the bikes themselves. They're super cheap, super easy to replace. So if you have a new regiment, you might want to go for these over horses, where these can be super easy to replace. You can get a bunch of extra parts very cheap. And yes, Imperial Guardsmen do have to actually worry about currencies. It's really funny. But overall, this thing is just going to carry a heavy weapon, and you might be asking yourself, what kind of heavy weapon? Well, this thing can carry a mining laser, a heavy stubber, or an incinerator. That is a flame type weapon. The flame type weapon can be used really well to clear trenches. Like this thing driving through a trench just with a flamethrower might actually be terrifying, as well as long as the trench is big enough for it to fit. And considering how small this vehicle actually is, it's very it's very common for it to be able to fit through those trenchways. If not, the motorcycles can. And driving a motorcycle through a trench just sounds fun. We have only one instance of them being, not the quad itself, but the bikes being used in the Sabbath Worlds Crusade, but we don't know much about it because it's only a slight lore blurb and not an actual explanation. So again, take what I say with a grain of salt. We do know that these things exist. We do know that they're used by the Guard. We don't know how they're actually used by the Guard. So the way that I would use these is as utility and reconnaissance, and overall just as a quad would be used, like running materials. It's not gonna, it doesn't have two mounted guns on the front of it like the Space Marine bikes or anything. The guy's not going to be carrying, like, he's not going to be a heavily armored Space Marine, so he can't take too much punishment. He's going to be a lightly armored, carapace armored individual. If he can get heavy carapace, that would be awesome, but probably not since he's a reconnaissance dude. So he's probably not even wearing carapace armor. He's probably wearing just light flak armor. And he's just riding in and trying to escape certain things, just doing the exact same thing that the Rough Riders would be doing. So that's where I would put this thing. Although I really like the idea that it's running lance tips back to the Rough Riders. I think that's kind of cool. So next up we have the Centaur. The Centaur is a really cool vehicle that I believe should make a massive comeback. This vehicle is really cool for what it does, and what it does is tow artillery pieces. Granted, if you're playing a game of Warhammer 40k, you don't have need of this vehicle because it doesn't fit a role that would be applicable to the tabletop game. Though it is a transport that can transport 5 men, the 5 men it's typically transporting are the artillery crew team. So while it takes the quad heavy mortar and or the quad launcher and the heavy mortar, I'm going to get those two names mixed up. My apologies. It tows them onto the battlefield or tows them away as the front line starts moving closer towards the artillery line, where the artillery line wants to stay as far away from combat as possible. This thing will be used as the front line starts encroaching. They'll drag the artillery pieces away and try to save their crew as much as possible. And or if the front line moves forward, they will drag the artillery closer so that it's still in its most optimal range. It is a really, really cool vehicle because it actually shows that the Imperial Guard really has logistics down, and I really like it for that reason. It is only armed with a heavy stubber, and the front weapon mount, which is typically for the Lehman Russ style chassis that it has, is empty. Now, this can be filled by a lasgun pointed out by one of the crewmen, or if they happen to have a specialist weapon, they can stick it out of there as a way of shooting, just for suppressive fire. The twin engines that are in the sides of this vehicle make this thing extremely fast, but it has twin engines mostly so it can pull equipment. But while it's not pulling equipment, this thing is going to be running back to the to the headquarters or supply unit and getting supplies back to the front line. So if it's not moving artillery, if it's not sweeping mines or plowing through razor fields or um, plowing through enemies, to be honest, it could do that as well. If it's not doing all of that, it is running supplies back to the front line. These are the the chimera. I want to call it a chimera. It's a centaur. The centaur can also be equipped with comms to make it a command vehicle. It could be equipped with extra armor to just make it more survivable, though that will slow it down slightly. It could be equipped with a minesweeper to help clear minefields. It can be equipped with a rough terrain modification, though I don't really know what they mean by that since it's a tank and the tank is the. But it might be the back thing so that it doesn't fall into a trench. The Centaur is typically used by the Death Corps Krieg, and Grenadiers especially love these things, but it isn't exclusively used by them. It can make an appearance in other armies, though it is more of a rare sight, where the Death Corps Krieg favor artillery and Rough Riders, or Death Riders in their case. The Centaur has a massive place in their army and is typically assigned to their army, though other regiments do make use of it. It can be equipped with Cameline netting to, try to hide the tank itself, and its battlefield role is that of transportation. It is going to keep its crew safe as much as possible, and if it's not towing something, its crew is going to rely on the speed of this vehicle, especially over rough terrain, to get them to an area of safety. Command units can use these things as transports, and they are seen as a little bit honorable. They can also be equipped with a enclosed case, which would make this thing environmentally safe. So if you have to operate in a heavily toxic area, a polluted planet, a radiation planet, or something with like plasma storms or not solar flares would just fry this thing. But anything with environmental hazards, this thing can equip a extra armor hard case on it and operate in that field. So it makes this thing, like most Imperial vehicles, very useful at multiple jobs. Because of this vehicle being as light as it is, two of these can be transported by a heavy Valkyrie and dropped into battle, which is really useful. It can also be equipped with an autocannon in the front if it's desperately needed, though it's not very common of an equipment. It is mostly made to replace the Chimera, but most Forge Worlds are still making the Chimera, where this thing is falling a little bit out of favor, though it really depends on the regiment itself, where some regiments, artillery regiments especially, like Death Corps Krieg, will favor this vehicle over the Chimera. The Chimera is still the Chimera for a reason. It is still used by everyone. So that's all I have for the Centaur. I think this thing needs to make a comeback on the actual 40k like tabletop. I want this thing as a collector series, and I think GW should push more for collection series or legends units where they're short form releases and they just are the equipment that's in the background. I would really like that. Next up, we have the Cyclops Demolition Vehicle. And for those of you that don't know, this is how new babies are born. Like the mom right there gives birth to the baby tank. And that's how new Imperial Guard vehicles are spawned. That's the exact thing, and there is lore justification. I'm joking, of course. The Cyclops Demolition Vehicle. What can be said about this thing? It is a remote explosive. This thing dries up to fortifications, to vehicles, to people, blows them up. It is used heavily by Grenadiers, though Grenadiers have their own variant of it, which is the remote explosive now. But in the olden days, they did make use of the Cyclops Demolition Vehicle, which makes me think that different regiments prefer different vehicles and the different style of track versus the I forget what the spinny things on the sides are called. Forgive me, but they're more useful in different environments, where I believe the other one is more useful because it can get through heavily thick mud, where this thing's weight might actually weigh it down and make it so that it can't get there. But the Cyclops Demolition Vehicle has basically one purpose: go there, blow that thing up. And it does it extremely well. The Cyclops is used heavily by Grenadiers, as I said, but it's also used by other regiments, like the Cadians use them, and several other regiments. They are not really. They can be transported aboard vehicles as depicted in this picture, though it is scary for the vehicles to carry this in it, since it is just a remote explosive, and if the vehicle gets penetrated and this thing gets penetrated, it might blow up the entire vehicle. But that has never stopped the Guard from doing something extremely stupid, like bringing a bomb aboard a vehicle and driving it between their own army to get it to the front line to blow up an enemy. So, what's there more to say? The Cyclops is the Cyclops. It's a really cool 25-point tank that is decent. I love these things. Uh, in 40k, they are currently slowly being replaced, and they will be moved to Legends come next edition. But we do have a replacement for it in the form of the remote explosive used by the Death Corps Grenadiers. So I'm quite happy with this. This thing technically does not have an entry yet, though, and I don't think it's classed as a light tank, although this would be classed the lightest tank that the Imperials use, as it is absolutely tiny, adorable, and I love it. And I find it really funny when people make conversions for the Cyclops Demolition Vehicle by buying the epic, like Lehman Russes, and just taking the turret off or keeping the turret on and just being like, yeah, go get him, little guy. There's not much to say about this. It is a very simplistic vehicle. It has a very simplistic role, and it's used by every regiment. It's just adorable. Moving on, we have the most iconic Imperial light vehicle, the Imperial Guard Sentinel. And you might be looking at that and being like, Alexis, that's not a Sentinel. What the hell is that? It is a Sentinel. See, it says it right there. Imperial Guard Sentinel. How could you not believe me? It says it right there. Anyway, the Sentinel has gone through a buttload of changes and has changed so much over the years. Whoop, that's the next one. And there's lore that explains some of the changes. There's no lore that really explains this change, though. This is just what the new Sentinel looks like. So this Sentinel is now just this Sentinel. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So the Sentinel started out as this humble, bipedal, lightly armored vehicle that looked like this, with the head of the dude just exposed and everything, and sometimes even their upper chest exposed, and a light armored vehicle. These things were running alongside knights and in the beginning. But then once the knight households were reintroduced back into the Imperium during the Great Crusade, the Imperial Guard, the Sentinel, became more of a mainstay for all the different armies, and many different varieties were built during the heresy. Now, I'm not going to get into all of them. There's a lot of them, but needless to say, this we're just going to talk about the Sentinels in 40k. This one does make an appearance in 40k, though it is extremely rare. But the Hermes Light and the Hermes Heavy Sentinels typically don't make an appearance in the later stages of Warhammer 40k. They're just not seen as often. That technology was lost, but somehow this stayed. But so did this and this and this. So yeah, I guess these are just easy to make. So, what is the Sentinel? The Sentinel is a lightly armored scout vehicle used typically for reconnaissance and is a bipedal walker. This bipedal nature of the Sentinel makes it so that it can run ahead of of the army itself, and as it moves through terrain, it can walk over obstacles. It can maneuver through terrain that would be very difficult for a tank to get through. So they operate ahead of their army and into enemy territory. They are renowned for their scouting ability and will operate with other scout units. They will coordinate with scout units, but typically Sentinel pilots are a bit of a renegade. They will betray orders if they think something is a more superior tactic. They will hunt certain vehicles. They will have personalities all of their own. And the Scout Sentinel is the most common of the Sentinel varieties as it is very easy to use. So the Sentinel itself can be equipped with multiple different types of weapons, including missile launchers, flamethrowers, the Sentinel chainsword, which is seen right here, the multi-laser, the plasma cannon, the hunter-killer missile, the las cannon. There are so many different weapons that this thing can use and utilize, but typically the Armored Sentinel uses the heavier class of weapons, where the Light Sentinel uses the lighter set of weapons. So the Light Sentinel will have the autocannon, will have the multi-laser, will have the heavy flamethrowers, and make use of the Sentinel chainsword, where the heavily armored Sentinels typically operate as, since they're a bit slower because they're heavily armored, they typically operate as tank killers and tank hunters. So they'll be armed with things like the plasma cannon, the multi-melta, the las cannon, and more seen with hunter-killer missiles versus the lighter cousin. So what's cool about the Sentinel is their ability to run. Sentinels can use these legs just like people or burbs to run. They are very quick, especially in difficult terrain, and they can even be known to jump, which is hilarious. I love the idea that a Sentinel can jump kick somebody. That is just funny to think about. But if there are like small gaps, or if it needs to get over a trench, it can either step over or even run up and just clear it by vaulting over it, just whee right over it. And I think that's really cool. Though if the jump is too big, it will start taking damage, but it can survive quite a bit of a fall, which is pretty impressive. The heavily armored Sentinel, on the other hand, can't really do this as much, though it is still a very fast vehicle. The lightly armored Sentinel typically operates in jungles, dangerous terrain, and urban environments, where the heavy Sentinel, again, is a tank hunter. But the Scout Sentinel does have a fatal weakness, which is, having this guy here in the open, which means they are susceptible to grenades, flaks, light arms fire, and even snipers can take these things out. The Sentinel is a really, really good and very utilized vehicle, but it is very easy for an enemy to steal, because all they have to do is pop this guy, jump inside it, and they have the Sentinel now. Look at me. I am the Sentinel pilot now. Aside from the weaponry, the Sentinel can be equipped with multiple different things of war gear, including camo netting, searchlights, smoke launchers, and even the hunter-killer missile, as shown before. But what makes the lightly armored Sentinel really cool is they can also carry supplies, as seen on the side of this one, for the pilot themselves, as well as the other scouting companies that they're with. So if they are operating alongside Rough Riders, they can simply coordinate themselves, drop packages, and have the Rough Riders collect and run away, and then the Sentinel can keep operating. Or, like stated before, the Wolf Quad could potentially run equipment up to this, including weaponry, like rearming this thing in the field, which is another thing I think the Wolf Quad would be more useful for than an actual shooting role. So, yeah. There are many, there are many different varieties of Sentinel, and a lot of different regiments make different uses of Sentinels themselves. The most common is the Scout Sentinel armed with the multi-laser, as depicted here. That one over there. This is the most common. The oh my god, I forgot. STC. Thank you, brain. The STC for this thing is from Mars itself, and it is mass produced by the millions. These things are super common. They are equipped with simple augers, so that they can auguries, so that they can scan the environment and locate enemies, threats, dangers, as well as things that might be impassable for vehicles of the main army, and then relay that information back to their coordinators. They typically operate in units of 1 to 3 and are just hunting parties looking for dangers in the environments. The armored sentinels, again, hunt tanks. They have the same auguries, but it's not as good. Different regiments specialize in different styles of sentinel. For instance, the Cadians have a specialized sentinel that utilizes extra armor and has an autocannon as its main gun, typically alongside a hunter-killer missile, and these things are designed for either light tank hunting, heavy infantry hunting, or medium to light bleh. Okay, let's try that again. The Cadian variety of the Sentinel is designed for medium to heavy infantry as well as fighting medium to light tanks. It is armed with an autocannon and typically has a hunter killer missile. It is armed with a bit extra armor to protect it and its occupants. Moving on, we have the Catachan Sentinel. This one specializes in camouflage, if you can believe that. The Catachans are smart enough to use camouflage, but their camouflage is literally just throwing a ghillie suit over the top of this thing and kind of hoping for the best, like right there, and just being like, yeah, it's good enough. But their favorite equipment is the chainsword as well as a heavy flamethrower. The chainsword for clearing out terrain so that their vehicles can get through easier or their guards can get through easier. And if they run into an opponent that they need to buzzsaw down, they will. The Catachans, I said the Cadians. I meant the Catachans. The Catachans use the cameline netting and camouflage their sentinels. They typically don't make use of the heavy sentinel because Catachans prefer jungle fighting, where the Cadians will specialize in the heavier sentinel and they will use the scout sentinel as well. Then you have the Talarn Desert Raiders, which typically make use of, well, the standard issue sentinel, though it is a bit built for their environment, so it has more environmental hazards in mind for desert style terrain. So it does come with some coolant systems, which I think is kind of cool. And there's a few other key features in it. The key difference for the Talarn's special Sentinel is that its feet are wider, so it doesn't sink in the sand, and it just has extra systems designed for keeping sand out of it. They are the ones that operate specifically in desert environments, and I'm assuming when they say desert, they mean snow. They don't mean snowy deserts, which are a thing, by the way. They mean sandy deserts, which I think is really cool. Moving on, we have the support sentinels, which could have the rocket pods on the side of them. They're more for artillery purposes, though they are a very short range artillery, but they are still for the scouting, looking at a location and bombing it, versus the actual artillery in the background that's like 9 miles away, firing and destroying enemy encampments and enemy troops. The more artillery oriented Sentinels are armed with better tracking technology and longer range auguries. My god, my accent is butchering that. Yeah, they can locate enemies further away and they're better at targeting than the typical Sentinels are. They have better targeting computers inside them, or cogitators, and their augury arrays are just more designed for finding enemy heavy infantry and heavy tanks and just barraging it with either frag or crack rockets. And I just really like them. They're really fun. And now let's move on to one of my personal favorite Sentinels. Now, you might be asking yourself, the hell is that? That is called the Sentinel Power Lifter. This thing is designed for reloading and rearming other war machines. So, in its hand right now, it has a rocket or a missile that it's going to be putting onto one of the Valkyries or various aircrafts that it has along with it. This thing is what's used for loading and unloading heavy equipment. They typically are the ones moving the large containers. They are the ones reloading various units in the field, and they're fast enough that they can run equipment back and forth. So they're quick, they hold a lot of material, and just like the quad, they can carry a lot more material, but they can move it a lot quicker. They are very common to see alongside the Imperial Navy as they rearm the Imperial Navy as well. But there have been instances of these things reloading and rearming other Sentinels, other tanks, as well as maybe even rearming Imperial Space Marine dreadnoughts. So I really like these things. I like that they're a part of the lore itself. And this is another way of showing that other there is an actual, like, how to put this, it's a way of showing that the vehicles themselves are designed with the idea of reloading in mind and a way of supplying themselves and running supplies back and forth. I really like these things because of that reason. They're really cool for the aesthetic of 40k, and while they don't appear anymore on the tabletop, they've been moved to Legends quite a long time ago. I do really wish that these would come back again as a collector series thing. They make a really good display for like reloading your aircrafts and everything, and I absolutely love them. Now, the one thing about these things is that while they have this giant clamp, essentially, the clamp isn't exactly fast. It is designed for just lifting. You'll see these things all over the place, especially in artillery regiments, running things back and forth, reloading the artillery. But these things will not be called upon for war itself unless you're actually being blitzed and your defenses are completely crushed. Will these things be called to just go and defend and just run up and try to pinch them to death? In the back of this thing, you can actually see a counterweight that's designed so that the Sentinel can lift and run equipment. And these things are mostly, again, just used for running supplies. And I just love them. Just look at them. They give the mightiest of pinch. Also, it does look like something that's directly out of Alien. Let's be real. It is the power lifter out of Alien. Like, we know that. But it's still cool. I like this. Now, I do have some assumptions about this thing that isn't included in any lore that I've ever seen or any lore that has been written. My theory is that both those arms can be operated independently and may even have a way of separating so that they can be used independently to grab different things and help reload certain vehicles. I do like the idea that Space Marine serfs might also make use of these things to run supplies to dreadnoughts to rearm them, because there is no way a Space Marine is running up to a dreadnought to rearm it. I guarantee the chapter serfs are going to be doing that, and they might be using these things as well. I think these things will be a very common sight alongside, like, if we were to give more realism to Space Marines in general, I think that these things would be used by the serfs as the serfs are the servants of the Space Marines. Failed aspirants are usually turned into serfs, and I feel that these things would be used heavily by them in order to resupply all of their equipment. I don't have any lore that suggests that they do this. That is just my theory on these, and in my opinion, it's the best way to actually see these things being used, and it only makes sense that this thing, since it's the right height, would be able to reload a dreadnought. And those arms might be delicate enough to actually reload the dreadnought itself. That's my theory on this thing. Tell me what your thoughts are on that. I just really like the idea of this thing being used more. So that's just me. I could go on about Sentinels for another like hour or two. There's tons of different varieties and everything. but I feel that I covered the vast majority of what the Sentinel is used for in a small format. If you guys want a full video on that, I mean, I probably will do one, and that would be a lot of fun. But I think we need to move on so that this video isn't 3 hours long. So yeah, I think this video is already over an hour. Maybe. I don't think so. I gotta check the timestamps. But moving on, we have the Siegfried, and this thing is yeah, this is from Epic. For those of you that don't know, Epic was the first attempt at GW for making a large scale game, like an actual like multiple armies. Think Total War, and this is actually what I want to see in Total War. To be honest, I want to see all of these really silly designs that were in Epic. It was called Epic Armageddon. Or Epic Space Marine, depending on which branch of it you go with. But in the Epic system, they invented a whole bunch of new tanks and new equipment and just gave like the smallest lore blurb about them, and we're just like, yeah, that's a thing, instead of what they have now, which is just based off of Adeptus Titanicus or Legio Titanicus, whatever the new game is called, the new Epic is called, where they just have models that they produce as larger scales, which I think are cool, although they have been moving away from that recently. We did just see a whole bunch of new heavy weapon platforms that don't have full scale models, so I thought that was cool. So we are slowly moving back towards that with the new Epic game for Titanicus, but I want to see something like this in Total War Warhammer 40k, where they start inventing random shit and they just throw it at the wall and see if it fits. And this thing definitely does not fit. So the lore for the Siegfried is actually really funny because it's again just a small blurb of lore, but this thing was designed by the Deathcore Krieg during their skirmish against each other, which, if you don't know, is also tech heresy. But we're not going to get into that. This was designed during the Civil War on Krieg. Now, it could have been designed by the Adeptus Mechanicus that was trying to help them, but it's very vague on who designed this tank. So this tank might actually just be tank heresy, might be heresy, and I love that idea. So I don't know what to really go over with this thing. It kind of just sucks. It's a Sentinel, and this meme sums it up perfectly. It has a las gun. It has a multi-laser. It's very slow. It is very lightly armored. Okay, let's actually get into the real lore of this thing. The Siegfried was designed during the schism that the Deathcore Krieg had, the civil war that they had. It's not stated by which side it was used primarily by, but because the Sentinels started becoming too lightly armored and too complex to build during the Civil War, they developed the Siegfried, which is a more armored version of a Sentinel and is based off of the Landcrawler agricultural machine, because they had no more use for that because they kind of poisoned their entire planet during this war with nuclear fire. So they designed this thing based off of the Landcrawler agricultural machine, gave it a bunch of weapons, and just called it good. It is armed with a multi-laser, a heavy stubber, and a pintle-mounted stormbolter. It is a slow-moving vehicle, but fast and light enough that it could fit the battlefield role of a sentinel. And once the Civil War was over, while these things were still made and still used, the Sentinel returned to the Deathcore Krieg, and they just started using the Sentinel again because they could get them from outside of their planet and not push their economy to, well, whatever's left of it. Although the Deathcore Krieg don't use an actual economy, they use more service-based. Yeah, I can go into lore about the Deathcore. We're not going to go fully into the lore of the Deathcore. Needless to say, this thing is very small, it's very cute, and it only appeared in Epic Armageddon, and I do wish that this thing had an actual model. And if somebody could find a like Colts 3D print of this thing, I kind of want one, and send it to me personally on Discord. Yeah, I would absolutely love that thing. But it is not superior to the Sentinel. It is just slow, and it is faster than the Landcrawler, but it's slow, and it's kind of useless. I love this thing. Next up, we have the Scylla Light Tank. This tank is not canon. I'm just going to put that right there. It is not an actual canon vehicle. It has never been part of the extended canon. It has never been a part of the actual canon. It is very, very weird that it's actually included in this, but I wanted to talk about this because this is a vehicle that was made as a proxy for a Sentinel for a Games Day, for from a Games Workshop employee to replace his armored Sentinel, and that's it. That's all that the lore we have on this thing. It's very small. It's not canon, but it's really cool, and I wanted to include it on this list because look at it. It looks awesome. And the article goes on to say that it can be equipped with a multi-laser, las cannon, heavy flamer, or autocannon, and no other weapon because it's supposed to be a Sentinel proxy. It's cool, but it's too big for a Sentinel, to be honest. And if somebody used one of these things and said it's a Sentinel against me, I would absolutely love that. I'd be like, hell yeah, you just paid twice as much for a Sentinel. That's cool. I'm definitely going to allow it in a game. Um, I think it fits the aesthetic of 40K. It's very silly. It kind of looks like a light tank destroyer with the cannon out of the front of it. But overall, it is a non-cannon tank. It's a vehicle proxy. And I just wanted to include it in the list because it's included on the list of light vehicles. So now, one of my favorite armored cars in all of Warhammer 40K, the Tauros. And we have the Tauros Venator. Named clearly after the Pokemon Tauros, I'm joking. The Tauros is an armored car that is utilized by a variety of different forces, from civilians to gene stealers, which would then become a different vehicle, to chaos cultists, to renegades, to everybody in the Imperium has the option to get the Tauros car. It is an armored vehicle. It is great, and I absolutely love this thing. The one that we're seeing is a variant for the Elysian drop troops, and this one is a variant used by the arbitrators or the enforcers. The enforcers. Sorry, my bad. The arbitrators and the enforcers are two different branches, and it's very strange that they're two different branches. But what the hell is the Tauros? Well, the Tauros is a car. All right, thanks for coming. Anyway, the Tauros is a lightly armored vehicle that can be flown in by a Valkyrie Sky Talon or can be dropped by a standard Valkyrie if it's light enough. And that's what makes the Tauros extremely good. The Tauros is a scout vehicle that often fits two people, the driver and the gunner. The gunner typically has a heavy bolter, heavy flamer, multi-laser, or a grenade launcher, I believe is the third weapon. Or the fourth weapon. I know how to count. And sometimes an additional seat is added so that a navigator can be a part of it. But the Tauros also includes its own equipment inside it so that they can operate in the field a lot longer than the Rough Riders or Scout equivalents. And what makes the Tauros extremely cool is, unlike the bikes and the what are the bikes called? I can't remember right now. The dirt cycles that are extremely loud, or the horses that are, well, the horses are quiet. But unlike most Imperial vehicles that have the multi-fuel engines that are very loud, the Tauros is an electric car, which I think is just super cool. So it's very, very quiet. So it's used for stealth operations. And they will throw things like cameline netting on top of this thing so that they can drive it in close to the enemy, throw a whole bunch of cameline netting on top of it, and hide there for several days if they really need to. They will track enemy movements, report it back to their superiors, and they'll even do hit and run tactics. They specialize in that, actually. So they will drive in really quickly, surprise an enemy because they could not hear the vehicle coming over the hum of war. But if it had a louder engine, they definitely would. It would come in, rapidly hit the enemy unit, and then run away, and then hide, throw its netting back on it, and be completely hidden to the enemy. This is utilized especially by the Elysian drop troops. The Elysians love these things because they simply fly them in with a crew inside them in a Valkyrie Sky Talon. The Valkyrie Sky Talon is a form of Valkyrie that can carry vehicles, and as it comes in, it drops these guys off really quickly and then flies out as fast as possible. So the enemies might be able to track the Valkyrie, and they might be able to track the vehicle itself based off of its tire tracks and everything, but the Tauros is an incredibly light vehicle, so typically it doesn't leave as much scarring on the ground as a typical vehicle, and because it's a light and quiet vehicle. It can drive away and hide and keep operating in the field for several months if it needs to. I absolutely love this thing. I love the fact that it's an electric vehicle. And then we have the Harrier variety, the heavier variety, the Tauros Venator. And again, like its contemporary, it is an electric car. But this electric car can house two, typically a twin linked heavy weapon. This thing will be armed with autocannons, las cannons, uh, the weapon that the Enforcer uses, which I cannot remember the name of it. It'll be equipped with one twin linked multi laser, and it can be equipped with Hunter Killer missiles, which makes this thing ideal for as an enemy tank line is moving in, they can come running behind it, fire at its rear, and then hide their vehicle before the enemy has a chance to react, maybe even misinterpreting the situation as a surprise attack by a much larger force and hunkering down versus, well, what a Sentinel would do, where it's very loud compared to the Tauros. It is a louder vehicle, but it can still scout. Where the Tauros can't go through a jungle, it can excel on urban and forest. Well, not forest. It can desert. It can operate in, and it typically operates in rural settings. So it can be extremely useful in certain settings where it can just drive up, blast an enemy, drive away, and hide. I absolutely love these things. I have 3 of these. I bought them when they were still Forge World, and the newer one is way bigger than it. The primary regiments that typically use the Tauros and the Tauros Venator are the Elysian Drop Troops and the Kasrkin of the Cadians. Both of these elite forces like to drop in really quickly, like literally drop in, and from Valkyries, just drop this thing in, have it do its mission, and stay there until they can be picked up by the same Valkyrie and just flown out. I absolutely love the idea of a stealth car in all of 40k because it's silly, but it makes absolute sense that one of these would exist in the 40k setting. I also found out that this cannon right here is called the concussive cannon, and it shoots sound, which is awesome. Um, but the Venator and the Tauros itself can be utilized by so many different forces and is often lifted by Genestealer Cult, by the common citizen can get this car, citizen, but the common person can actually get one of these because the Tauros itself is just an armored car. Now, keep in mind, the Tauros as the armored car variant does not have the big gun on the back of it, but does still have a gun, which is hilarious because Imperium. So moving on from this, we'll go into one of my other favorite vehicles. That's right, a Jeep. So armored cars in all of Warhammer 40k come in various different varieties and are typically listed as ambiguous. God, I can't say that. Holy crap, I put that in a slight note and I could not pronounce it. So, armored cars in 40k come in 1,000 to 1,000,000 different types and varieties and is typically just called the armored car. The armored cars are typically used by anybody in the Imperium. They're very easy to manufacture. In fact, like worlds themselves can manufacture them, which is pretty neat. And one of the most famous examples of an armored vehicle in 40k is the Genestealer Cult Limo. And I just had to bring this up. So armored vehicles are very common in the Imperium. There's a ton of different varieties, and I think the Genestealer Cult even has one of their own, which is just an armored vehicle. And technically, even the Space Marine ATV is an armored vehicle. It is pretty standard, though theirs is much faster and designed for carrying Space Marines. There is a variant of it that is just an armored car, and no matter what car you can think of in Warhammer 40k, it probably exists. And I'm guessing the Toyota Wars still exists in 40k, because that would just be funny. I just wanted to bring up the armored cars because they are utilized by the Imperium, and they're not as common, but they are there, and I just really, really, really like that fact that they're there. Armored cars can be anything from like your standard pickup truck to a heavily, heavily armored vehicle, almost tank-like armor, depending on how important the person is that's being carried within it. Like a Genestealer Cult Patriarch being carried in one is going to have a limo, where a commissar or a Imperial, like Castellan or something, would be in a much heavily armored car. These typically don't see too many battlefields outside their own personal planet, but it is something that can happen. I just wanted to bring up the armored cars because I think them being used by the Imperium is really funny, and them used by the Imperial Guard is even funnier. Again, the one that makes the most sense is like the Jeep and the Tauros, because they're, well, they make sense. Now we move on to the last section of our video covering the well, not the Imperial Army, but the Imperial Army does use this as well. This thing is thousands of years old, like tens of thousands of years old, or 10,000 years old at minimum. But we're moving on to the vehicles that are used by the Astromilitarum. The last section of it, the cargo vehicles, known by a very simple name, cargo, and then the number of wheels or the size of the wheel. We have the Cargo 6, the Cargo 8, the Cargo 12, and the Cargo 20. And you might be thinking to yourself, Alexis, what the hell is a Cargo 6? And it is this thing with 6 wheels. I don't know how else to describe this thing. But let's go into what the cargo vehicles actually are. So the cargo vehicles are a really, really heavy cargo vehicle. They can carry more than 40 tons of cargo for the various armies that they're supplying. And these are the things that are running supply lines. So they are armed with heavy stubbers, heavy bolters, grenade launchers, heavy flamethrowers, whatever the Cargo 8 operator thinks is the best weapon for it will simply operate it. So I'm going to talk about the Cargo 8 because it has more lore than the Cargo 6. The Cargo 6 is this, but with 6 wheels, and that's the only difference. So the Cargo 8 is more known for its role in the Necromunda game, but this thing right here is used to run all of the weaponry rearming from the dropship to, once the dropship lands, from the dropship to the front lines, this thing is running supplies constantly. Tons and tons of supplies are run back and forth by these things as they're trying to resupply their units. Running alongside them, you would have things like the Sentinel Powerlifter to unload them really quickly. And this thing will take an entire container lifted by 2 powerlifters, load it onto the back of this vehicle, and then they will run all the way to the enemy. Yeah, they just give it all up to the enemy. No, they run all the way up to where they need to drop their supplies. The Sentinel powerlifters will be there waiting for them. They will unload it really quickly and then drive all the way back. They are a fairly fast vehicle for what they are and how big they are, though they're not as fast as the Sentinel or even some of the... They are fast for how big they are. Let's put it that way. The Cargo 6 and the Cargo 8 can carry a variety of equipment into the battlefield, but they typically carry them in Minotaurum containers, as seen right there. Minotaurum, there we go, not Minotaurum, 2 different things. But the Minotaurum armored container there, which is equipped with tons and tons of equipment for like weapons, ammunition, bombs if it's needed, everything that they need to keep running back and forth to the front line. But these things can also carry vehicles if needed, and they will carry light vehicles. Multiple sentinels can be carried into battle. They can even carry an additional car alongside them, or multiple if needed. So as you can see in the background, there is another 8 platform that is carrying another container. And the more containers this thing is carrying, the more firepower it's going to have on top of it. In the back is typically stored a servitor that will help unload the container once it reaches its destination. And this thing can pull anywhere from 2 to 3 trailers along with it. But the more trailers it's trailing with it, the heavier it's going to be. And unlike a train itself, it doesn't have a secondary engine in the back to help push it. So the more it's pulling, the slower it's going to be, the harder it's going to be to protect itself. The Cargo 8 is the standard issue size, and the Cargo 6 is a lighter size of the standard cargo vehicle sizes. I know this is weird because I have to say cargo a whole bunch, and I'm assuming they have cargo pants on, because of course they do. But moving on to the more heavy variety, we have the Cargo 12. This is a transport so large that it can transport a Baneblade on the back of it. And that's what it's designed to do. It is transporting a Baneblade. And I absolutely love that, and it's considered a light vehicle. Keep that in mind. It is the one of the larger of the light vehicles. And the reason it's a light vehicle is because it's lightly armored. And if this thing is transporting a Baneblade and gets, unfortunately, you know, stuck, or somebody attacks the supply lines, it's going to be really dangerous for the people that steal that Baneblade. But typically, if they're transporting something as important as a Baneblade to the front lines, or to a commandery, or to a position of power, they will be escorted by sentinels, or by other vehicles, or even having aircraft above them to protect them. So the cargo eights are something that is running supplies and needs to be protected at all times. The largest variety of them is called the Cargo 20. And the, the Cargo 20 is huge. The wheels itself are 3 times the size of a man, which the average male height is like 5'8", so depending on where you live. So this thing is huge. The Cargo 20 is something that's just seen in the background, and it transports mostly ore, but it can transport, depending on its lore source, because we don't have much on it. I assume if the Cargo 12 can carry a Baneblade, I'm assuming the Cargo 20 can carry multiple Baneblades. But that is just my theory on it, and I have nothing to back it up. Typically, if they need to transport something bigger than a Baneblade, they're going to build a trainway to transport it, and transport it via train. But there is a Cargo 20 big enough to transport at least a Baneblade, if not something bigger. And there is a bigger transport that we will get into in the future. But that is all for the Imperial vehicles, that the Imperial light vehicles that I had to cover today. If there is anything that you wanted to point out in the comments, or one of your favorite vehicles happens to be one of these light vehicles, please let me know. My favorite light vehicle is the Tauros. I love that car. It is so cool. But that's just me. I want to know your thoughts. And do you want to see a part 2 of this series? As always, share everything. I'm Norn Queen Alexis. I love you guys. Bye.